So I've been putting off making this video for probably 6 months, even though it's a pretty requested video, and that is the idea of how can I improve at the flowchart method. I'm keenly aware that whenever you watch me do the flowchart method, you're like, oh, that looks pretty easy, I can do that, and you try to do it on your own, and you're like, it's taken me 1.5 years, like I'm growing facial hair during it, and I'm a woman. You know, it's just very difficult to identify like the basic sciences and the relationships. And honestly, whenever I personally tutor students, we run into this as well. But generally with those students, I will watch them do flowcharts and I will critique them along the way, and I'll provide them with some drills for improvement. And also we'll talk about the concept of the flowchart method and help them kind of reorient that in their brains. But since Maggie and I no longer tutor, for 2 reasons. One, we're just real busy with med school right now. We may spend all day in the OR, and then, you know, we get home and we try to make one of these videos or something like that, or maybe we go to the gym, or maybe we just play video games, I don't know. But 2, we also, when we were tutoring, we're charging like, it was $200 an hour, and that's just pretty expensive. So instead, what I'm gonna end up doing is I'm just going to find a way to put that tutoring value into a video form and just give it away for free on YouTube. So today what we're talking about is how can you get better at the flowchart method? Now, for those of you that don't know what the flowchart method is, that is a method of mapping out a passage that I created whenever I was studying for the MCAT myself, because I too frequently would read an entire passage and get to the questions and be like, I have no clue what this is talking about. Like, not even sure if I read the right passage. I don't know, maybe I was daydreaming. I was definitely daydreaming, and I don't want you to feel like that. And so my journey to creating this flowchart method idea was, I've started just kind of like actively reading. I was taking notes to keep myself engaged, because if you haven't figured out yet, these passages are painfully boring. And then I started noticing like, oh, my scores are increasing. So I would dive deeper into it, like, well, what's actually helping my scores increase? And as I both tutored and as I kind of studied for the exam myself, what I was focusing on shrank, and I figured out the 2 or 3 things that were really important in every single science passage, and that came to fruition as the flowchart method. So with the flowchart method, there's really 3 core tenets of it. The first one is like comprehension. You've got to be able to understand what the passage is talking about. The second one's basic sciences, identifying the sciences that are frequently tested. You know, it kind of helps you lay a good foundation for some of the other more advanced strategies, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And the third one is the relationships. And the relationships are always, that's like the sexy one. If there is something sexy about the MCAT, it's definitely the relationship side of the flowchart method. See, this is why you should use IFD. You don't really get, Kaplan doesn't call anything sexy, we do. But we're going to focus today on identifying basic sciences, because I would bet you're in one of 2 camps. You are either highlighting freaking everything and saying that's a basic science, or you're like highlighting nothing because you don't think the basic science portion of it is that important, or like you can keep it in your mind or something like that. And so what I want to do is talk you through it a little bit like I would if I were personally tutoring you, and then show you a couple examples of what I am actually looking at when I'm thinking basic sciences, because it's not, you know, I've explained it previously as anything you would see in a review textbook, and like that's like level 1 understanding of flowchart method, but we're taking you through. Now, the reason that I did not make this video previously, it's because Maggie and I are aware that what we are doing is important, or at least we think that what we're doing is important. I spend every day at the hospital now, for the most part, and when I'm on rotations that I want to do, I freaking love it. You know, it feels like a hobby. A lot of it feels like work, but it's not something that I would give up. If I had to do it again, it would suck, but I think I'd do it again. And this test stood in the way of me doing that twice. I just finished my 3rd year of medical school, and if I had done well in the MCAT the first time, I would be finishing intern year of residency, which would be a lot nicer. But regardless, I wouldn't have made this. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if the MCAT had not been a problem for me. So with that understanding, that drive that what we're doing is important, I was nervous that making a more niche video like this would impact our ability to reach a broad audience. What I've found closure in is that I'm going to put the charge of spreading the news of IFD and telling people and even growing our audience. I'm putting our business, honestly, in your hands. So if you like this video, or if you like our product, you gotta tell somebody. please tell somebody, because if we keep growing, I will keep making niche videos that you probably need. But if, you know, our growing stagnates, then we're gonna have to go back to making those more surface level videos, and those are great and they grab a wide audience, but I want you, the person watching this video, to score 520. And we're gonna need some more advanced talks if we're gonna do that. This is the first one. This is the flowchart method, basic sciences. So when we're talking about basic sciences of the flowchart method, usually what I am looking for is I'm looking for any high yield science that I see within the passage. Now, I've previously explained it as if I recognize a science from like my review textbook, then I will either write it out or I will highlight it. So I've previously explained high yield sciences as anything that you would see in your review textbooks or things you would remember from your courses. So things like proteins or things like a condensation reaction or something like that. And I would have told you to highlight that or write it down. And that's kind of like surface level basic sciences. But what I want you to start doing is I want you to start reading in between the lines. And I'll give you examples to show that, but I want you to start looking for big themes. And those themes are usually what we have labeled our chapter titles in the High Yield Sciences book and in our eCourse. To be able to identify them, you have to know what they are. I really think the best way to do that is to get the High Yield course. I prefer the UWorld one, and I'll tell you why a little bit later. But the UWorld X IFD course, the link will be in the description, because that allows you to kind of not only know the list that you should know, but also have it framed in your mind for how it's brought up and tested so that you're ready for it whenever they throw tricks your way. But if you're just curious about the list, you can always go on our website and you can always click our High Yield Bundle ebook, and I believe we have like a table of contents. So just check that out. It's free. You can access it. It's on our website. Now, those are more umbrella topics, so you obviously won't get like all the nuances that we would want you to pay attention to, but you know, YouTube is free, and I respect your desire to study for free. A lot of you have that desire, and so that's another option. Go look at the chapter titles. Why not? But as you start understanding those high yield sciences, the first thing to do is recognize them, and the second thing to do is kind of synthesize them. And so I'm going to show you an example of a couple passages, and I've just picked a couple random ones. Spoiler alert, they are from the sample test. Not so spoiler alert, just hot take. It's okay if you see some spoilers. Don't freak out about it, all right? The sample test is probably not going to be too indicative of your score because it's fairly easy anyways. I'm going to show you passages from that sample test because it's free, and AAMC only lets me share resources with you that are free. So that's what we'll look at. Let's go to the passage. So this is from BB sample test, BB section, passage number 9. You see over here my like relationships that I've done from a previous video. You can check it out on our channel if you're curious. We're not talking about the relationships today. We're not even touching them. What we're going to talk about are basic sciences. So I'm going to read this to you. Again, it's great to have something read to you. Reminds me of childhood. I'm going to show you how my brain is kind of synthesizing this as I go through it. So at the very beginning, internal respiration. All right. So when I see internal respiration, I am not just going to highlight internal respiration. I would probably write down respiration, like resp, and then in my mind, I'm thinking the whole thing from like glycolysis to, what's it called, the Krebs cycle. Dang, I'm getting too far away from it. It's like oxidative phosphorylation, the electron transport chain. All that's fair game now, just because they're talking about respiration. So it's the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between tissue cells and capillaries. Okay, well, maybe that's wrong because that's a different thing. This is actually talking about breathing. As carbon dioxide is produced in the cells, it enters the capillaries, resulting in a partial blood pressure. Okay, so that's a big one. So partial blood pressure. I want you to kind of think about these basic sciences as you're reading through it. So the baseline recommendation we've always given is just to like highlight this, but the more advanced idea is to kind of ask yourself quickly, what is blood partial pressure? What is partial pressure? You know, kind of like what connections can I build between that? And remember, that's the idea of like the pressure of a gas that is dissolved. So it's going to be dissolved in the blood. Continuing on, of approximately 45 millimeters of mercury. And again, a lot of this stuff I would put in my relationships, but we're not talking about those right now. In the capillaries, 70% of the carbon dioxide transported by the blood is converted to bicarb ions, and then they give you the formula for bicarb by the following reaction that occurs within the blood cells, and then they give you the reaction. So first things first, this is happening inside of the blood cells. So now everything that builds up a red blood cell is fair game. So whenever we highlight red blood cells, we're thinking of all the testable things that are on red blood cells, and I think we have a whole chapter about like hemoglobin, myoglobin, like Bohr shifts and things of that nature. So I'm thinking like red blood cell, pH changes, things of that nature, heme groups, you know, they test you on irons, all that crap. All that's fair game now, just because we're talking about red blood cells. And then they show you really the meat of what this passage is, which is this reaction. Now, whenever you look at this reaction, it's much less important to look at this stuff than it is to look at this stuff, because the stuff that's in the over the arrows is usually telling you like either what's making the reaction proceed, or it's telling you like what is an enzyme, and in this case it's what's an enzyme. And it's also telling you whether or not the reaction is reversible by giving you the double-sided arrows, right? That means reversible. So these are both reversible, and carbonic anhydrase is the enzyme that allows X to go to Y. That should be hitting some neurons about, well, why do I need an enzyme? Well, obviously, or not, I guess not so obviously, I guess obvious to you because you've basically got a 4-year degree in this crap. We have some kind of activation energy we have to get over, or we just need this to occur faster. So we need some increase in speed. So there's a necessity for an enzyme there. And then I always like to take note of hydrogen just because they test pH so much, but that's probably not that important for this passage. Now it goes on to say most of the bicarb ions leave the red blood cells and enter the plasma. Okay, what's plasma? Okay, it's the liquid stuff that surrounds the red blood cells in your blood, like the serum. Maybe that's not an easier way. But most of the bicarb leaves the red blood cells and goes to the plasma. And that's technically a relationship, so we won't talk about it. But what that brings up to me, and this is kind of some of that advanced read between the lines stuff, is I'm going to ask myself, well, how does it transport out? Okay, so we're either talking about transporters or we're talking about gradients. And I guess either way we're talking about gradients. So on my paper would go the word gradients because that's a super important topic. It's huge throughout the MCAT. That's a new chapter that we ended up writing for the book. I think I taught the lesson. It might have been Maggie though. And I think it's one of the highest yield topics there is. And that's been a new revelation of mine in the past few years as we've been teaching through IFD, is that gradients are everywhere. The resulting ionic imbalance in the red blood cells is equalized by the rapid movement of chloride ions into the red blood cells from the plasma. Okay, so you see that chloride's going into the red blood cells from the plasma. So now we've got this like bicarb leaves, chloride enters. Okay, so what does that make you think of? It makes me think of antiporters, right? The proteins that allow the exit of one chemical or molecule and the entrance of another. So that's going to go on my paper. All this is reading in between the lines, right? Another 23% of the CO2 is transported by the blood in the form of carbaminohemoglobin. You'll learn that word in medical biochemistry and then you'll forget it. Cheers. Another 23% of the carbon dioxide is transported by the blood. Oh, I already read that one. Both carbon dioxide and hydrogen bind reversibly, so reversible binding to the globin portion of the hemoglobin molecules in the red blood cells. So remember, we kind of talked about like all the things that make up red blood cells, and now we're mentioning some of them. Globins, hemoglobins, things of that nature. So maybe they will test us on something structural. The attachment of carbon dioxide to carbaminohemoglobin also facilitates the dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin at low PO2 levels. Remember, this is just dissolved oxygen. So now this is kind of touching on a little bit of that comprehension. This is telling you that whenever we don't have a lot of oxygen dissolved in our blood, hemoglobin kind of donates some of its oxygen it's been holding on to so that it keeps a steady level of dissolved blood within the oxygen. That's the whole purpose of it, right? Into the tissue capillary beds. The final 7% of CO2 produced by respiring cells dissolves directly into the plasma. So CO2 is also dissolving directly into the plasma. Now, if we dissolved more CO2 into the plasma, would we increase this or decrease this? Okay, those are good questions to ask yourself. Increased, by the way. All forms of CO2 are transported from the tissues to the lungs, where they are returned to gaseous form and are exhaled during external respiration, the exchange of CO2 and oxygen between the capillaries and the alveoli of the lung. So reading in between the lines is huge, and that's really the purpose of this. And I wanted to show you some examples, and so I'll show you one more. We will, why not CP? That feels good. Oh gosh. We'll try it. Researchers performed an experiment to investigate the thermal properties of human skin with regard to heat transfer. For this purpose, an iron wire with known electrical and thermal properties was mounted in a specifically designed holder and placed 5 centimeters away from the forearm skin of a volunteer. Okay, so I want to start thinking about how that would actually physically happen. If I were to design the experiment and I had my arm, that's a hand and an arm, next to like a hot wire or even like an iron skillet, think about it. How does the heat flow? Well, heat goes across a gradient from high to low, right? Kind of like if you open up your fridge, it feels like cold air is hitting you, but what's actually happening is the heat is leaving your body, because heat is just like a measurement of movement and speed and things like that, because I'm always thinking gradients. The design enabled heat from the wire to be transferred to the skin. Okay. I guess I could have shut my mouth and read another sentence, right? So heat is transferred from the wire to the skin. At room temperature, the wire had a length L of 4 and a diameter D and a mass of 4 times 10 to the negative third. Okay, so now what I'm starting to do is think of equations that are associated with heat, heat transfer, diffusion, and I'll write all these down. Diffusion, heat transfer, mass, and things of that nature. The one that's coming to mind is Q is equal to MCAT. Q equals MCAT, although we may not end up using that. The wire was connected in series. Okay, so remember series, we're connecting, there's series and parallel, right? So I'm thinking all those things, those are all high yield, because what if they explain this whole design and then they ask you a question about something in parallel? So you need to be thinking of those in advance. With an ammeter, a power supply, and a switch. So what we're doing here is we're talking about circuits. So reading in between the lines, we're talking about circuits. The researchers selected a voltage and closed the switch so that current can flow through the switch, raising the wire's temperature. Okay, so if I see voltage and current, I'm immediately thinking of Ohm's law, right? So I would write that down. Values in table 1 were measured in 5 trials with different wire temps. Note, the initial value of R, did it tell us what R is? Oh, that's the resistance, was measured at a temperature of 293 kelvins with an ohm meter. The other values of R were calculated from the values of V and L. Okay, so whenever they tell you something like this is just a little freebie, they're probably gonna ask you to kind of like back work your own equation or something of that nature. So they're probably gonna ask you to essentially set up a ratio and figure it out. Okay, so I'm thinking Ohm's law, I'm thinking ratio, and I'm thinking I'm about to have to do some stinking math. Maybe that's right. I really can't remember. It's looking like it though. The change in wire length is related to the change in temperature by the relationship delta L is equal to alpha L delta T. Okay, and they give us the coefficient of thermal expansion as a constant, similar relationship. So now they're setting all this up. So these are definitely important. We're probably gonna have to use these. Describes how the diameter of a wire changes when it is heated. Another little free tidbit, if they give you equations, you might have to use them, but it's very likely that you're gonna have to use a different equation to either A, solve for something that's missing, or B, just use a different equation entirely. Sometimes they like to throw you an equation and hope that you anchor on using that equation. If you can use that equation, it's probably appropriate, but just keep in mind that you may not be able to. Constant has the same value in both equations. Energy radiated, so now they open up a whole new can of worms with energy. That's not what I want. That's what I want. So now I'm thinking all about all the things energy. Radiated from the heat wire is alpha sigma T to the 4th, where A is the surface area of the wire, and sigma is 5.67, etc., and that's a fake word. I don't know what that means. So all in all, this is a big physics passage, right? We're gonna have to do some serious math, and I would be thinking about heats, I would be thinking circuits, I'd be thinking Ohm's law, and I would be thinking about all of that in the context of heat and heat transfer and the diffusion. We can kind of scroll quickly through these. And yeah, so when I talked about ratios, that's what that's going to be. Solving density, so that's going to be using their equations alongside the equation that we know for density. So this is using the thermal expansion equation. And then number 37, during trial 5, V is held at a constant. How did the circuit change? So this is more of a conceptual one. So how does voltage increase heat transfer? How does current increase? How does increase in heat impact current if voltage is held constant is essentially what they're asking. And so that's another ratio question. So even for the ones that, I think these were two random passages, but it's kind of good examples because the first one's very sciencey and we can definitely orient ourselves with the sciences, but this second one is very like physicsy, very mathy. And even whenever there are not giant sciences for you to like latch onto, there are certainly little tidbits that you can take away from every passage and label it under a basic science. So all in all, read between the lines. Great drills for improving at this, drills that I've had my students do. What you want to do is you want to, before you go and watch one of our videos, all of our passage breakdowns have us flowcharting. Before you watch the video, take the passage. Even if you've seen the video, even if you've taken the question, you know the answers, that's completely okay because I bet you didn't memorize the flowchart too. Make your own flowchart. Time yourself. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm getting ahead of myself for something else in the series. But make your own flowchart and compare it to what Maggie and I have going through. You'll notice that we don't highlight every science. So for example, there would be a lot of people here that would highlight like thermal or skin just because you've seen it, iron just because you've seen it. But remember, you've got to interpret this in the context of everything we're talking about. They're not necessarily testing you on the chemistry of iron right here, even though iron is a fair topic and it's pretty high yield on the MCAT. What they're testing you on is physics. So orient yourself to what you're talking about and allow that orientation to guide the basic sciences that you write down. And for the love of everything that's holy, read between the lines. If there's a gradient, you better write it down. For how I would practice this personally, past the drills that I just laid out for you, is I would 1000% invest in the UWorld IFD High Yield program. Using the IFD High Yield program, you're going to be able to actually identify all these sciences, and we're teaching you all these things so that whenever we start talking about the flow of bicarb across a membrane, your brain isn't just thinking like bicarb flow. Great, your brain is thinking like gradients because we orient it in that way. And we teach you these associations and we teach you them in the context that the MCAT uses. So all of our thought process, Maggie and I are both so far removed from undergraduate. We're really not thinking or teaching in the terms of undergraduate or from a textbook. We're really thinking and teaching in the terms of MCAT practice passages because that's most of the content review that Maggie and I do is actually taking practice passages for this channel or, we do a lot of research whenever we're designing products and things of that nature. So that UWorld IFD program is going to allow you to learn those sciences properly, which is paramount. Learning the high yield sciences properly allows you to have a good foundation to build up all these strategies on top of so that you can really be a successful MCAT student and do it quickly. And then having UWorld alongside it allows you to actually get some good, meaningful practice. And their explanations do a great job of plugging in some of those like holes as far as the low yield content goes. So I certainly think it's a great option, but if you do not want to do that, that does not prohibit you from excelling on the MCAT. I'm going to keep making these videos. I'm going to continue to make some more advanced videos, but remember, we can only do that if we continue to grow, and we're going to place that in your hands because we trust you. You're going to be our future colleagues. We're going to be consulting you in the future. We're going to be sending patients to you in the future, and we respect that, and we respect you, and we appreciate what you're doing now, and we appreciate what you're going to do in the future for our families and patients alongside that. So thank you for watching the video. If you like this format, let us know. And also something else that I have considered doing is if we can find the time making passage breakdowns similar to what we've done for the WMC sample test and the scored free practice exam or FLE 5. I've considered doing that for WMC 1 through 4. But the caveat is that the only legal way for us to do that is if we give you access to the WMC practice passages, which means you'd have to buy them through us. Let me know if that's something that you would be interested in, is us having some kind of like deal where you pay us basically what the WMC charges you for us to give you the practice passages and the video explanations for it. And let me know how much you would be willing to pay for that, because that will kind of decide whether that's the best thing for us to do for the company, and also if like we should hire somebody else to do it. I'm really not sure. I'm kind of thinking out loud here. Let us know if if you're like, hey, that's worth 20 bucks a month, and then you only need it for a month, that's $20 or something like that. Just let us know in the comments below. You all have been as much a part of this company as we have, and we are strictly just responding to your needs. Thanks for watching the video. Thanks for all your support. It really means the world to me. It really does. And I will see you in the next one, or I will see you in the hospital sometime. Take it easy.